March 2022. Dawn over the Everglades paints the water golden. James Miller checks his alligator traps. In 30 years of hunting, he has seen a lot. But what lies in the metal cage makes his hands tremble. A worn backpack, university textbooks, a student ID card in the name of Emily Reynolds, issued in September 2018. Crook understands. He holds the key to a mystery that has tormented Florida for 3 years. A mystery that has destroyed families and stumped the state's best detectives. The story began on a sunny day on March 15, 2019. University of South Florida. The biology department was buzzing with anticipation for spring break. Students were rushing to finish their last projects before vacation. But Emily Reynolds and David Chen planned to spend their free time studying. Emily smoothed her blonde hair and checked her equipment list. Her gray eyes sparkled with excitement. For her, the Everglades weren't just swamps. They were a living laboratory, an ecosystem she dreamed of studying. "Did you remember the waterproof containers?" she asked David. He nodded, stroking his professional camera. David had always been a man of few words. But when it came to wildlife photography, his eyes lit up as brightly as Emily's. Their research project was on the impact of tourism on the aquatic ecosystem. Simple topic. 2-day trip. What could go wrong? Professor Johnston approved the plan. The route was standard. The Anhinga Trail, a well-known sampling spot. Hundreds of students had been there before. At 2:30 p.m., the rented Honda CR-V left the university parking lot. Emily was driving. David was studying maps in the passenger seat. The trunk was filled with research equipment, sample containers, measuring instruments, and a 2-day supply of water. And David's camera. The damn camera that would be the key to solving the mystery. 4:45 p.m. Emily's last message to her friend Sarah. "We've reached the entry point. The connection is bad. We'll be back tomorrow evening." The car's GPS tracker recorded a stop at the Anhinga Trail parking lot at 5 p.m. The Everglades greeted the students with its deceptive beauty. The clear water reflected the clouds. White herons stood motionless, waiting for prey. Alligators drifted near the surface, looking like floating logs. David couldn't resist and took a few shots. Emily collected the first water samples. Everything was going according to plan. But the Everglades are deceiving. Danger lurks beneath the beauty. The swamps stretch for thousands of square kilometers. It's easy to get lost here. And deep in the swamp, where no tourist had ever set foot, someone was watching. 5:45 p.m. The last photo on David's camera shows the 2 students by the water. They look calm, focused on their work. Half an hour later, their trail goes cold. March 16th. Emily misses her morning classes. For Sarah Johnson, this was the first alarm bell. In 3 years of friendship, Emily had never skipped a lecture without a valid reason, especially not an important microbiology lab. "Maybe they got stuck in the swamps," suggested her roommate. But Emily's phone was silent, and David wasn't answering his mother's calls from California. By evening, the alarm had turned to panic. Sarah turned to the group's advisor. Professor Johnston contacted the campus police. At 10 p.m., the parents filed an official missing persons report. Detective Maria Sanchez was assigned the case at 11:30 p.m. A 15-year veteran, she had seen it all. But something about this case made her suspicious. 2 responsible students. A familiar route, good weather, and a complete disappearance. "We'll start the search at dawn," she told the dispatcher. March 17th, 6:30 a.m. The search team found the Honda CR-V. The car was in the same spot where the GPS had last picked up a signal. The doors were unlocked. The keys were under the driver's mat, a common practice among students. Personal belongings were there. Wallets, documents, a change of clothes. But the backpacks and research equipment were gone. Detective Sanchez examined the interior. There were no signs of a struggle, no traces of blood. The car looked as if its owners had simply gotten out and vanished into thin air. They headed for the swamps, she concluded. The question is, voluntarily or not? The first version seemed obvious, an accident. The students got lost and got into trouble. Perhaps they fell victim to an alligator or a poisonous snake. But the experienced detective sensed that the story was much more complicated. By noon, reinforcements had arrived in the Everglades. The Coast Guard sent out boats. The police sent up helicopters with thermal imaging cameras. Hundreds of volunteers from the university joined the search. Emily's parents flew in from Tampa. Robert Reynolds, a Boeing engineer, immediately took control of the situation. His wife Linda coordinated the volunteers. David's family arrived from California. Dr. Liu Chen, a heart surgeon, was used to saving lives. Now all he could do was wait and pray. The search covered a radius of 50 kilometers. Teams in boats combed the canals. Groups on foot searched every island. On the second day, they found their first clue, a piece of blue fabric on a cypress branch. Later, experts confirmed that it was a fragment of David's shirt. The find gave hope and at the same time heightened fears. The students had definitely been here. But where were they now? A week of searching yielded new finds. A waterproof container with water samples, traces of a campfire on a remote island, someone's jacket caught on a snag. Each discovery gave hope, and each turned out to be a dead end. The container belonged to the students, but it was empty. The fire had been lit by tourists a week ago. The jacket turned out to be lost a year ago. Volunteers worked in 3 shifts. Search dogs combed hundreds of square kilometers. Divers checked all accessible bodies of water. The Everglades seemed to have swallowed the 2 young people without a trace. By the end of March, the official search was scaled back. The families refused to give up. They hired private investigators and offered a $50,000 reward. Detective Sanchez continued to work on the case. Something wouldn't let her rest. April 2019. The investigation had reached a dead end. Sanchez reviewed all the evidence. She studied the criminal history of the area. And she stumbled upon a disturbing pattern. Over the past 5 years, there had been several attacks on tourists in Everglades. Robberies, equipment thefts. Most of the victims were young couples with expensive cameras. One of the suspects caught her attention in particular. Ray Talbot, 34 years old, a local resident with a long criminal record. Theft, fighting, violating the terms of his parole. He knew the swamps like the back of his hand. Sanchez found him in a trailer on the outskirts of town. Talbot seemed nervous and evasive. He claimed he was in town on the day the students disappeared. But his alibi was shaky. No one could confirm his whereabouts on March 15th. "I didn't touch any students," he repeated. There was no direct evidence. Talbot was released, but placed under surveillance. By the summer of 2019, the story had attracted national attention. CNN devoted a special report to the disappearance. Netflix announced a documentary. The students' families found themselves at the center of a media storm. Cameras followed them everywhere. Journalists hunted for exclusive interviews. Linda Reynolds created the Bring Emily Home Fund. May Chen practically moved to Florida to coordinate private searches. But the media attention also had side effects. Hundreds of false leads, calls from hoaxers, conspiracy theories on social media. One woman swore she saw the students at a gas station hundreds of miles from the Everglades. An anonymous caller reported screams in the swamps. A psychic claimed to sense negative energy in a certain part of the swamps. Every lead had to be checked. Everyone turned out to be a mirage. Fall 2019. Media attention shifted to other events. Volunteer searches were reduced to symbolic weekend trips. Detective Sanchez did not give up. She regularly patrolled the Everglades, interviewed local residents, and studied satellite images. Talbot remained the prime suspect. But without direct evidence, the case was going nowhere. The students' parents were faced with a harsh reality. Their children could be dead. Their bodies might never be found. Robert and Linda Reynolds began to argue. The stress was destroying their marriage. Dr. Chen took a leave of absence, unable to return to his normal life. By Christmas 2019, the case was effectively frozen. 2020 brought new challenges. The pandemic hampered the search. Restrictions minimized patrols in the swamps. The families spent the second anniversary of the disappearance virtually. Memorial candles were lit in video conferences. The university established a scholarship in Emily and David's name. Detective Sanchez periodically returned to the case. She studied new search technologies. She hoped for a breakthrough. 2021 brought the Reynolds' divorce. Robert couldn't stand the uncertainty. Linda blamed him for burying their daughter alive. Mei Chen moved to Florida for good. She rented an apartment near the Everglades. Every weekend, she went to the swamps alone, hoping to find something. Talbot disappeared from view. He moved to another state, evading surveillance. The case cooled down, but the Everglades kept its secrets. March 15, 2022. Exactly 3 years after the disappearance, James Croak Miller was checking traps in a remote part of the swamps, an area only the most experienced hunters could reach, a place where no official search had been conducted. In a metal cage intended for alligators lay a backpack covered in mud. Croak pulled out his find and examined its contents. A student ID, university textbooks, a waterproof notebook with research notes, and a damaged but intact camera with a surviving memory card. The hunter's hands trembled as he dialed the police. In 30 years of working in the swamps, he had found many strange things. But this was special. It was a thread that could unravel a 3-year-old mystery. Detective Sanchez received the call at 2:30 p.m. When she heard the news, her heart skipped a beat. Finally, a breakthrough. But she didn't yet know that David's camera contained more than just answers. It contained the face of the killer. March 16, 2022. FBI Crime Lab in Miami. Expert Thomas Gray carefully removes the memory card from David's damaged camera. 3 years underwater and covered in mud have turned the device into a rusty piece of metal. But the card is protected by a waterproof case. The chances of recovering the data are 50-50, he tells Detective Sanchez. She clenches her fists. After 3 years of dead ends, this is the only lead. The last hope for the Reynolds and Chen families. Initial attempts at recovery fail. The files are damaged. Many frames are lost forever. But on the 3rd day, there is a breakthrough. Gray recovers 47 photos and 1 video. The quality is poor, but the content is discernible. Detective, you need to see this. His voice sounds tense. Sanchez leans over the monitor. The last moments of the 2 students' lives appear on the screen. 2:30 p.m. Emily and David at the entrance to the Everglades. They smile at the camera. Young, full of hope, unaware of the impending disaster. 4:15 p.m. Collecting water samples. Emily is leaning over the device. David is photographing a heron in flight. 5:30 p.m. The students look tired but satisfied. The research is going according to plan. And then the picture changes dramatically. 5:45 p.m. An unexpected shot makes Sanchez flinch. In the background, partially hidden by vegetation, a middle-aged man watches the students. His face is blurred, but his silhouette is clearly visible. He is holding something in his hands, possibly binoculars. "David has spotted someone watching us," whispers the expert. The next shots show growing anxiety. The students look around more frequently. Emily says something to David, pointing toward the bushes. 6:20 p.m. The last photos are high-quality shots. David discreetly points the camera toward the observer. The man has moved closer. Now his face is much clearer. Sanchez stares at the monitor. The features seem familiar. Where has she seen this man before? "Zoom in," she asks. Gray launches the image enhancement program. Artificial intelligence processes the pixels and restores details. The face becomes clearer, and Sanchez realizes who she is looking at. "Ray Talbot," she says aloud. The same suspect she interrogated 3 years ago. The man who swore he had never seen the students. But David's camera captured him stalking his victims. "We have a video file," Gray reports. The 3-minute recording plays back with poor sound quality. But the words are discernible. David's voice. That guy is still there." Emily, alarmed. "He's been watching us for half an hour." The sound of branches, footsteps on marshy ground. David. "Someone is following us. We need to get back to the car." The last seconds of the recording are rapid breathing and fragments of phrases. "He's coming this way. Hurry." The recording cuts off. Sanchez feels a chill run down his spine. These students knew they were in danger. They tried to escape, but it was too late. "Put out an APB for Talbot immediately," she orders. But Ray Talbot has disappeared. After their conversation 3 years ago, he moved to Georgia. Then the trail goes cold. The search takes 2 weeks. The FBI taps into federal databases. They trace his financial transactions, medical records, and car registrations. They find Talbot in Alabama. He's working at a sawmill under a false name. He lives in a rented trailer and avoids surveillance cameras. He is arrested early in the morning. Talbot resists, shouting that he is innocent. But during a search of his home, detectives find evidence. David Chen's watch is in a desk drawer. Emily's silver bracelet is hidden under the mattress. A waterproof notebook with research notes. "Where did you get these things?" Sanchez asks. Talbot remains silent. He demands a lawyer, but the evidence speaks for itself. The DNA on the watch matches David's samples. Emily's fingerprints are on the bracelet. Talbot kept the murder trophies for 3 years. The first interrogation leads nowhere. Talbot denies any involvement in the disappearances. He claims to have found the items in the swamps by accident. "I was collecting scrap metal," he lies. "I stumbled upon the backpack in the water." But the photos from David's camera destroy his alibi. An expert on the timing of the photos confirms that Talbot was following the students half an hour before they disappeared. During the second interrogation, the defendant begins to give ground. "Okay, I saw them in the swamps. So what? That's not a crime." "Why did you lie earlier?" Sanchez doesn't back down. "I knew you'd pin everything on me." Sanchez shows him an enlarged photo. Talbot, hiding in the bushes, watching the unsuspecting students. "You were following them. You were planning an attack." Talbot turns pale. "No, I just happened to see them." "Happened to see them? With binoculars? In a remote part of the swamps?" The lawyer tries to stop the questioning. But Talbot can't stop now. The 3-year burden of guilt is weighing heavily on him. "I didn't want to kill them," he finally blurts out. The courtroom falls silent. Sanchez leans forward. What happened that day, Ray? Everything went wrong. They weren't supposed to die. But when the detective asks for details, Talbot clams up. He refuses to talk about his motives, about what exactly happened in the swamps. Where are the bodies? Is the only thing that matters to the families. Talbot remains silent for a long time. Then he agrees to show them the location in exchange for a reduced sentence. Life instead of death, his lawyer says. The prosecutor agrees. The families need to be able to bury their kids. The search party heads into the deepest part of the Everglades. Talbot, in handcuffs, shows them the way. Here, he says when the boats reach a narrow channel overgrown with mangrove trees. This place is 12 kilometers from the official search area. Neither rescuers nor volunteers have ever been here. Talbot leads the group to a small island. In the center is a flooded cave, hidden under the roots of trees. There, he nods toward the dark water. Divers descend to a depth of 3 meters. Half an hour later, they bring up the first remains. Bones preserved in the cool water of the cave. Fragments of clothing, a backpack with textbooks. The forensic expert works for 3 days. DNA analysis confirms the worst fears. Emily Reynolds and David Chen have been found. The examination shows that death was caused by drowning. But there are signs of blunt force trauma to the head on the bones. The students were beaten before they died. Talbot killed them brutally. And then he lived a normal life for 3 years, as if nothing had happened. Linda Reynolds weeps upon hearing the news. May Chen faints in the courtroom. Robert Reynolds clenches his fists as he stares at his daughter's killer. But one mystery remains unsolved. During the third interrogation, Sanchez asks the main question. Why did you do it? Talbot looks at the floor. You wouldn't understand. Try to explain. They had everything, and I had nothing. That's no reason to kill. Talbot raises his head. His eyes are filled with a mixture of anger and self-pity. They were young, beautiful, rich. They were studying at university. They had their whole lives ahead of them. And me? An ex-con living in a trailer? Sanchez realizes that this is a classic case of murder motivated by envy. Talbot saw the students with their expensive equipment and decided to rob them. But something went wrong. Did you only plan to steal? Yes. I wanted to take the camera and the equipment, sell them in town. And what happened? Talbot falls silent. His lawyer gestures for him to stop answering questions. But the whole truth will only come out in court. Why did he do it? The truth turned out to be more terrifying than anything else. October 2022. Miami-Dade County Court. Ray Talbot enters the courtroom wearing an orange prison jumpsuit. His handcuffs clank with every step. The victim's family sit in the front row. Linda Reynolds clutches her ex-husband's hand. May Chen closes her eyes, gathering her strength. Judge Patricia Morgan opens the hearing. In her 20 years on the bench, she has seen some of the most brutal crimes. But this case is different. The defendant is charged with the first-degree murder of 2 people. She reads. How do you plead? The defense attorney whispers something to Talbot. He shakes his head. Guilty, he says hoarsely. The courtroom falls silent. The victim's parents had expected a long trial and a plea of not guilty. But Talbot admits to the murders. However, the prosecutor insists on a full trial. The families have a right to know the whole truth. Every horrific detail of that day, in March 2019. Assistant District Attorney Daniel Costa stands up to deliver his opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are about to hear a story of how envy turned into hatred, and hatred turned into cold-blooded murder. He points to photos of Emily and David. The young faces smile from the portraits. These students came to Everglades to study science. They wanted to learn about nature, to help the environment. Instead, they encountered a monster. Costa turns to Talbot. The defendant watched them for hours. He stalked them like a predator, and then he killed them out of greed and malice. The defense tries to present the case as a robbery that ended tragically. But the facts tell a different story. Detective Sanchez is called as the first witness. She talks about the 3-year investigation, about false leads and the agonizing wait for the families, about the discovery of the backpack by an alligator hunter. What did the examination of the victim's camera reveal? Asks the prosecutor. The defendant followed the students for at least half an hour. It was a deliberate stalking. Costa shows the reconstructed photos. Talbot is hiding in the bushes. He is watching through binoculars. He creeps closer. Does this look like a chance encounter? Definitely not. This was a manhunt. The defense objects. Talbot's lawyer claims that his client was simply in the swamps on business, but the FBI expert destroys this version. The metadata from the photos shows the exact time and location. The defendant was moving through the swamps, following the victims. This was no accident. A map with timestamps appears on the screen. The red line shows Talbot's path. The blue line shows the student's route. The lines gradually converge. At 6 p.m., the distance between them was less than 50 meters, explains the expert. The victims' families clenched their fists. Their children knew about the danger. They tried to get away. But the killer was faster. Forensic expert Dr. Elizabeth Harris presents the autopsy results. The cause of death was drowning, but before that the victim suffered multiple blunt head injuries. She shows photos of the bones. The cracks in the skulls indicate violent blows. The murder weapon? Presumably a heavy stick or metal object. The blows were delivered with great force. Could the victims have defended themselves? There are defensive injuries on the bones of the hands. They tried to protect themselves from the blows. Mei Chen quietly sobs. Her son fought for his life until the very end. But the most shocking testimony comes from Talbot himself. After much persuasion from his lawyer, he agrees to tell the whole truth in exchange for life imprisonment instead of the death penalty. Describe the events of March 15, 2019, the judge asks. Talbot is silent for a long time. Then he begins to speak in a monotone voice. I was in the swamps in the morning, looking for scrap metal to sell. I saw their car in the parking lot. What did you think? Rich students, expensive camera, scientific equipment, a good opportunity to make some money. Did you decide to rob them? Talbot nods. I planned to wait until dark, take their things when they returned to the car. But something changed? They noticed me. The guy started taking pictures of me. The prosecutor shows the last frames from David's camera. A blurry figure of Talbot in the bushes. What did you feel? Anger. They thought they were better than me. They looked at me like I was dirt. That's not true, whispers Linda Reynolds. Emily didn't look down on anyone. But in Talbot's twisted mind, the students had become symbols of everything he didn't have. Youth, education, a future. I went over to them. I wanted to take the camera. And what happened? The guy said he'd call the police. The girl tried to call, but there was no signal. Talbot pauses. The room waits tensely for him to continue. I didn't plan to kill them, but they wouldn't listen. Tell us more. The girl was screaming. The guy swung at me with a stick. I took the stick away from him. And you hit him? Yes, hard. He fell down. And Emily Reynolds? Talbot lowers his head. She tried to run away, but I caught up with her. The courtroom shudders with horror. Linda Reynolds covers her face with her hands. How many times did you hit them? I don't remember. A lot, until they stopped moving. And then? I dragged the bodies into a cave under the water. I thought they'd never be found. The prosecutor shows photos of the crime scene, an underwater cave where the students' remains lay for 3 years. Why did you take their personal belongings? Talbot shrugs. I wanted to sell the camera, and then I just kept it. Like trophies? I don't know. But the expert psychiatrist explains the true motives to the court. The defendant suffers from a deep inferiority complex. The murders gave him a sense of power over those he considered better than himself. Does that explain the brutality? The multiple blows indicate extreme hatred. This was not a simple robbery. The defense tries to portray Talbot as a victim of circumstance. Poverty, alcoholism, a difficult childhood. But the prosecutor mercilessly dismantles these arguments. Millions of people live in poverty, but they don't kill innocent students. He turns to the jury. The defendant made a choice. He chose hatred over humanity. Witness testimony continues for a week. Emily's friends talk about her dreams of becoming a marine biologist. Teachers recall David's brilliant wildlife photography. Parents deliver emotional speeches describing their pain at their loss. Emily wanted to save the oceans, says Linda Reynolds. Now I think every day about the discoveries she could have made. Dr. Chen struggles to hold back tears. David dreamed of making nature documentaries. His photographs could have changed people's attitudes toward the environment. The defense calls witnesses on Talbot's behalf. Former colleagues, neighbors. They describe him as a quiet, non-aggressive man. But these testimonies cannot outweigh the horrific facts of the crime. The closing arguments last 2 days. The defense attorney pleads for leniency. My client made a terrible mistake, but the death penalty will not bring back the victims. The prosecutor demands the maximum penalty. These murders were particularly brutal. Talbot watched his victims die. He does not deserve mercy. The jury deliberates for 6 hours. When they return, the sound of hearts beating can be heard in the courtroom. On the charge of first-degree murder of Emily Reynolds, we find the defendant guilty, the foreman of the jury announces. On the charge of first-degree murder of David Chen, we find the defendant guilty. Talbot shows no emotion. The victims' families cry with relief. The judge schedules sentencing hearings for the following week. But the outcome is a foregone conclusion. In Florida, first-degree double murder carries either life imprisonment or the death penalty. The families make their final statements. We don't want our daughter's killer to die, Robert Reynolds says unexpectedly. But he should spend the rest of his life in prison. Mei Chen agrees. Let him remember what he did every day. The judge delivers the sentence. Ray Talbot, the court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on each count. The sentences are to be served consecutively. This means that Talbot will die in prison. He is led away in handcuffs. He does not look back at the victims' families. November 2022. Cemetery at the University of South Florida. Emily Reynolds and David Chen finally find peace. Their ashes are buried under a shared white marble monument. The words, "Nature Researchers, their work will continue," are engraved on the tombstone. The university establishes a research laboratory named after the deceased students. It will study the ecology of the Everglades, just as Emily and David had planned to do. Linda Reynolds becomes an activist for the rights of crime victims' families. Her foundation helps other parents cope with their losses. Dr. Chen returns to work. He creates a scholarship program for student wildlife photographers. Detective Sanchez gets a promotion. Her experience with this case helps her solve other difficult crimes. Ray Talbot is serving time in a maximum security prison in Florida. He spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. Every day, he thinks about that day in March 2019. The Everglades remain as beautiful and dangerous as ever. Tourists come to photograph the wildlife. Researchers study the unique ecosystem. But now, additional security cameras have been installed in the swamps. GPS beacons are issued to all visitors. Ranger patrols have been increased. The story of Emily and David changed the security system. Their deaths were not in vain if they save others. Justice has been served. The killer got what he deserved. The families got answers to the questions that had tormented them. The mystery of the Everglades has been solved. The monster hiding in the thickets has been found and punished. Good has triumphed over evil. Justice has prevailed. And somewhere in the clear waters of the swamps, white herons are reflected, like the souls of two young explorers who will forever remain a part of the nature they loved so much.